Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Michael Greenberg. He's the founder and CEO of Third Brain Automation. And we're going to talk about using tactical AI in business, which I think will be really interesting. And I joked with Michael that was it really him or was it an AI? And he actually gave me an interesting answer. So let's start out with that, Mike. When I said to you, is this you or is this an AI? Tell listeners what you told me offline.
Give it another year. At this point, there are enough interviews of me talking about certain subjects. I've been, appearing on podcasts for a few years as part of my own marketing and personal promotion. And so there's a lot of audio of me talking about a lot of different things. And the systems that create speech from text are getting good enough to the point where they can clone people's voices. The systems where you can give an AI, and I'll explain what I mean by AI in just a minute, but you can give an AI all of my transcripts from appearances and everything I've written, and it can probably talk pretty convincingly like me. It might not have quite the same intonation because I've got a little bit of an odd speaking pattern at times, but other than that, it would sound the same and it would say the right words.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay. Well, let's start with your business. So what does Third Brain do? And then we'll start giving some specific examples for different businesses and industries on how businesses could start using AI.
Yeah. So Third Brain does what we call digital operations. And the reason we say that is because in order for you to actually automate something, you need all of your digital infrastructure, the different software you use, to be connected so that way they can actually pass data between them. And if you want to deploy AI, then you not only have to have all that data connected, but you also have to have the process super well documented and managed so that way you can design an AI system to support or to replace portions of that work. And so that ends up being to automate a workflow, we have to take another 5 or 6 steps.
Okay. So let's give an example. So what would be a workflow that's very susceptible to automation by AI, and how would it work?
Yeah. Let's go with one of our most common cases, which is customer onboarding. Normally in a business, you've got some sort of marketing, sales data machine, CRM. It's called a customer relation or contact relationship management system. And that's going to have all the data related up until the point of sale. And then you've normally got a different system that handles and tracks, have they bought from us? And there is often a third system that companies have for tracking customer support. And so It is very common for us to build, and this is what we call a data automation, that when somebody is onboarded, it takes all the information from that CRM and it will then pass it to the payments and financial system and link those records and then pass it as well to the customer support system and also link those records. So that way we can track somebody from the first time they get hit by marketing materials, and we can understand how their data is connected and stored, and then track all of the information related to that customer even after they buy and on through.
Okay, so how can automation amplify this? What would be a specific AI use?
Yeah. So let's take a marketing agency as an example. The onboarding workflow I described applies to almost every business that has customers. But for a marketing agency, right after that onboarding, the AI may generate the client briefs, and the AI may generate the initial project descriptions based off of the initial sales calls with the client. And so then you probably used to have somebody sit down for like 4 hours and write up all the material about the client, write up all of their project goals, write up what the first assignments are going to be, all of that. But 50% of that's templated information. The rest of it is already in the calls that you had with that client and the back and forth emails. And so the AI can just scoop up all that data and generate all of those initial documents for you. And
I've used like ChatGPT, Perplexity, all this other stuff. You got to really look at it and watch it, because it just makes stuff up sometimes that's not true. I've seen in certain fields where I have a lot of knowledge and I ask these large language models about stuff, it just makes stuff up or it's not true. And if let's say you're in the, if the information you're going to give has a, requirements to be legally factual, what do you do to make sure that your AI is not hallucinating on you or, again, just producing garbage?
So there's a lot of prompting techniques and automation techniques like logic loops and secondary checkers that we use to ensure accuracy. And the level of those, the style in which we build those varies depending on how critical the operation is.
So what's a secondary checker? Like, how would that work? What's an example of that?
So let's say you have, first, let's take a step back. How does an AI, how does large language models, or what we're talking about, how do they actually work in terms of generating the text in front of you? It is very important to understand why you can hit that regenerate button on all of the apps, because the way they work is they are essentially predicting bunches of tokens. And so tokens are like groups of characters, or words is generally about one token, one word. They are predicting the tokens that are going to come next. So the reason we have those hallucinations is because there is some outlier prediction that gets chosen instead of the most common result.
Okay.
So
what does regenerate do in a large language model? Like, I get an answer, I don't like it, I smash the regenerate button. What does it do?
Runs that prediction chain again. So every word, it's then predicting what is the next word. And it's going to run that whole chain again for the response. So you can get a different response because it's going down a different path into sort of that infinite branching setup. Does that make sense? I know we're getting a little heady, I feel like.
No, it's okay. Well, all right. So a regenerate button is one method if you get an unsatisfactory answer.
That doesn't work inside an automation. There's
what
hit a regenerate button.
Well, what if you had this part of the automation? What if you took you averaged together 3 runs of of an LLM using like a regenerate command, or if you did, let's say, 3 different prompts that are very similar, and then combined all the outputs into something, would that generate anything more favorable, or is that's not how it works?
So you're actually very close. You're on the right path. Our most common solution is going to be generating, if we know that like hallucinations are a fairly common problem in a data set, we are going to do 5 or 10 generations, and we're not going to average them, but we're going to go with the most common occurrence set. And the reason we don't average them, it's a really simple reason we don't average them. It's likely to cause another hallucination.
Oh, really? Okay.
We're adding another step in the mix. Another one that we use, especially in like social content generation, is we will have one model that will call like a writer with its own writing prompt, and then we will have an editor and a fact checker, and those are going to be 2 more separate ones. And so then the writer will get feedback from the editor and the fact checker. And
are the editor and the fact checkers humans, or the other LLMs?
They're other LLMs. So for like a fact checker, we're generally going to use something like a Gemini, because it has near perfect recall.
Okay.
And so that allows us like, oh, if we know that it is like, as a very specific example, I have an AI that I use to generate case studies. And it is very common that it will hallucinate on the number of employees and their revenue in the case study because those are numbers. They hallucinate much more often on numbers.
Because it's tuned more for the language instead of numbers.
Yep.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
And numbers are much less predictable. That's why math is so much harder with these models.
Okay. So I'm seeing now I apologize for jumping around. I'm seeing there's a lot possible here to talk about.
Oh yeah.
So when you talked about numbers, let's say, yeah, I mean, is it at the point yet where, let's say, I want to connect an LLM, like you said, to make a case study and then connect it to like Mathematica, like some math software that will do whatever mathematical manipulation I want and pass that back to the LLM.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that stuff is possible. And what is that called? Does it have any special name?
So that's going to be called tool use or functions, depending on exactly how you deploy it. But tool use is going to be the most common, where essentially you're like teaching it, here's all the API calls you could make. One way, like we built a little financial forecasting tool, and it used Claude to go through and then just standardize line item names. And then it would use a Python script that it would be able to call to then forecast the next 3 years with linear regression.
Okay. So an LLM could be considered it could just be part of a program, I guess, that's made, right? I mean, is there, yeah.
That's really how we try to deploy them, is not as chatbots, because it's too easy for somebody to mess up with a chatbot. Once you let people choose their words, they can choose the wrong ones.
I see.
And so we're much more likely to have like a form input, and then there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the background, and then you get the output you want.
So let's say I run a business, and I use like Salesforce for my CRM, and I use, I don't know, some email software, MailChimp, and I use some other kinds of software. So your company, for instance, might have the expertise or would have the expertise to incorporate an LLM or AI module in there somewhere as part of the workflow to get results that you normally couldn't get. You kind of like string all these tools together, make them work better, but it's just like, I guess, like adding an intelligent module in a way onto all the tools you're currently using. Maybe a supervisory module. I don't know. Like how would you characterize it? Something like that.
Yeah. So the way we like to talk about it is we can automate large portions of somebody's workflow, and then we're going to keep a human in the loop. And so what that looks like is, the AI might generate that first draft, and then a human is going to revise and edit it before publishing. The AI might handle the summaries, but the human is going to be the one actually talking with the client.
Right. Okay. It'll be like the human's office assistant. Get these numbers and put them in a chart and tell me what's the average, the mean, median, mode, blah, 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 whatever. Find me a couple of citations for this and put it all together into a report.
Yeah.
Would that be an example? Okay.
Yeah. Right now, I think as of today, we have GPT-4 and 4.0 and Claude 3.5 and Gemini 1.5. And in my mind, these are the best interns I've ever had.
So what processes in your business or in other businesses you consult with are the most amenable to having an AI, add-on?
Yeah. Could I describe like what the process looks like?
Sure.
So it is a fairly simple process. It is data heavy. and it requires just a little bit of fuzzy logic. So you can get it down to a flow chart, if this, then that, but you can't get it down to zeros and ones.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is like quoting to build a fence is not something an AI could do. It could not make a proposal to build a fence because it can't understand all the intricacies of the land in order to, figure out, hey, can we actually put a fence post there? But as we already
costing it
talked
could
about,
do, once the material is identified, then costing, I'm sure it could do with a lookup table, right?
yes and no. Like at that point, you're really not using an AI much. We do a lot of like construction and home services quote and proposal generation. And there is surprisingly zero AI involved in automating that process because it's all ones and zeros. There's no fuzzy logic. But like routing an email, that requires fuzzy logic. You can't just a human can look at any email and identify, oh, is this a customer complaint, or is this somebody trying to place an order, or is this somebody trying to update an order, or is this somebody checking on the status of an order? But that is very difficult for a machine to do with keywords. Very easy for a large language model like GPT-4 to do.
Okay.
And so that hits that hits high data. It's all emails, which are pure data, and it can handle any volume. It has a little bit of fuzzy logic. It's not something that we can boil down to just ones and zeros. And it is something that we can very easily flowchart. You can always flowchart where an email is supposed to go in an organization.
Oh, well, quick aside here. To create flowcharts from a list of if-thens, let's say, what would be a good software to do that? I mean, is AI particularly suited to that task to make a flowchart?
Yes. So you're going to use two tools. And if you use like a Claude with the artifacts feature, it will actually generate a flowchart for you. And I know this is audio only, so I'm not going to share an example, but you can also ask any one of the AIs today to generate what's called Mermaid.js code. And Mermaid.js is a JavaScript diagramming language. And so you can take that code and copy paste it directly into Mermaid. The company that generated the language actually has a flowchart that you can use where you paste it in there, or you can go to draw.io and it will also accept Mermaid.js.
Okay. This brings up the question, which I should have asked earlier, ChatGPT 4 versus 4.0 versus Gemini versus Perplexity versus Claude versus whatever. What are these different LLMs good at, not good at? Like, why do you have to use different ones for different things?
Well, because we're not at the level of standardization that we are in cars yet. So each one of them has been trained on different things, and each one of them is designed a little differently, and so they perform better or worse at different task sets. I personally use Claude as my daily driver, so to speak. I have found that their projects and artifacts are the best for my work to support it. I don't need image generation or anything like that. Gemini, I think, is best, at least how I use it, is for recall. So it has the best ability to recall information over large context windows. And I also use it because it can watch videos and then respond to them. I think it's a pretty good critical thinker as well. So I'll often, I might have Claude writing for me, and then Gemini is going to be my editor. Very common setup. GPT-4 and 4.0 are solid models. They are maybe the easiest to deploy on. And I think the assistance features in particular set the OpenAI ecosystem apart, because you can teach assistants how to use specific tools. And that allows you to build teams of assistants that help in assistant tasks.
Okay. So, all right. So you've discovered how all these are tuned and what things they're useful for. Gotcha.
Yeah.
When you mentioned Claude with artifacts, what is that? What does that mean?
So Claude has some cool features where it will create it'll have a little pop-up window, and it'll create a second file. And that then allows you to much more easily work on the file and go back and forth. So it's if you opened a notepad and you and the AI could share the notepad.
Okay. To do what? What would be an example?
So when I'm generating flowcharts, when I ask Claude to generate a Mermaid.js flowchart, it generates that flowchart and displays it as an artifact. So our conversation will be on the left and the artifact will be on the right. And then if I ask it to make an update, it will then generate a new copy of that artifact. So it has version control as it generates different versions, and I can have my conversation separate so I don't have to, like, you know how you kind of have to clip your copy and paste sometimes if you're asking it to make things? You don't have to do any of that.
Well, can you tell it where to store each version or how to autosave or what to do?
So it just saves every generation.
Where does it save it to, though?
This is inside the Claude chat app.
Oh, but how do you export it to something that you would keep?
Copy paste, but it's a one click because the artifact is generated separately. If you'd like, I know the listeners won't be able to see, but if you'd like, I can share my screen and show you an example.
Okay, interesting. So I guess it's not complete automation, but I guess you could do it where it would save it to a location that you specify, right?
Not so. At least with the Claude app, it doesn't integrate with anything else. It's siloed. So you'd have to download it and then move it into one of the other chart tools or something like that. So we move all of ours into draw.io and then they get saved to our Google Drive.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's fine enough, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally one click, which is quite nice.
Is it easy to make sure that the prompts you're typing in, the data you're using are kept private and not to be, put into the LLM for use by others?
I'll say yes with an asterisk, because I don't believe that any one of these companies is really following what they say right now.
What about if you do a custom GPT? I heard there's something called Llama where you can run your own servers, run like an LLM. Would it be kept private then?
Yeah. Llama is an open source option, and we have customers we deploy open source for. So if you're going to something like that, then it would be fully private. But I think anyone who you're hosting on other people's servers right now, every AI company is trying to get it updated to do more AI.
Okay.
Personally, I just don't trust big tech when it comes to data privacy either.
Yeah, I'm all with you. What about prompting itself? How difficult is it, and how do you learn how to prompt for different applications?
At least with Claude and Anthropic, they have a fantastic prompting big wiki that walks through all sorts of techniques and stuff. Otherwise, I think prompting does take some work to learn how to do. You kind of have to learn what words to choose and how to order them properly. It doesn't take that long for most people. And I think once somebody sees a good prompt that helps them and understands the structure of it, they really take off. So it's one of those things you kind of have to understand and see examples of it working in order to understand how you might be able to use it yourself.
Any example of a bad versus a good prompt, something that took you a while to figure out? That would, a good example for people.
Yeah, actually. Well, this is prompt adjacent. I work with a lot of really long documents, and I will only do one very short prompt before I open a new chat and start over. And so I might just ask it hey, can you summarize this transcript? Or what did I, Michael, promise Bob that I would get him by Wednesday? And so I'll ask just the one thing. And then if I want to ask more, I'm going to open a new chat and go again.
Why would you open a new chat versus just continue?
Because if you have really long documents, then you're adding a lot more context much quicker. And the longer it is, the more likely it's going to mess up.
Oh, if you give too much stuff, it backfires.
Exactly. So you get your best response on the first one, and then you're often better just starting over fresh. Another sort of related tip is don't ask it to make edits or changes. AI is really pretty bad at that because it wants to rewrite everything when you ask it to make a change. It doesn't want to leave parts of it the same. And so it's often better to edit yourself and then start in a fresh chat rather than going back and forth with it. I wish I had some great prompt I could give you, but 99% of my prompts are can you outline this? Or given the attached white paper, please outline a case study using the transcript that I have also attached. So, I'm not using any of those big mega prompts or anything like that anymore.
Okay, but using, again, giving it too much data will cause it to error.
It can, but, and this all goes back to why Claude is my daily driver. I use Claude because it has a very large context window. It can take something like 50,000 words with no problem. And so it works really well with very short prompts, 1 or 2 sentence prompts, and very large amounts of data coming in around that prompt. And so I've sort of crafted my workflow to work best with it.
Okay, gotcha.
And I think GPT-4 benefits from a little longer prompt in general.
So what is a custom GPT or custom LLM versus a fine-tuned one?
So a custom GPT is just, it means it has a different, what they call a system prompt, the prompt that you can't see. And then it may also be instructed on how to use some specific tools. It might have access to some files, so it might know some things already. But like a custom GPT is the same GPT-4 at the base layer. It's like 2 cars with the same engine. Fine-tuning is like turbocharging. So you're making it often much more specified on its task, and you are fundamentally changing the way it works. You're changing that mix.
So can you overtune if you're fine-tuning? Like, first of all, how is fine-tuning done, and when does it work and when does it backfire?
Yeah. So fine-tuning is really best done when you have fairly large data sets and you have very clean data. And so, like, you would fine-tune for a specific task. You might fine-tune GPT-4 on how to use Mathematica.
How else can you fine-tune it with like your own personal data?
Well, you can go to OpenAI Playground, and then you can input, like, I think if we want to get to like a practical example everyone can kind of understand, I think like a tweet writer is a good one. And so fine-tuning is going to be focused on 2 things. If you've got like a tweet writing GPT-4, you're going to be focusing on fine-tuning it so that way it understands what a good tweet actually looks like. The format, the structure, the word choice, the language, the style. And then you're also going to be fine-tuning it on the knowledge and on the like style of the particular person that you're looking to mimic. And so I'm using tweets and Twitter as an example because it's a large data set. It used to be very easy and public to scrape, and published content like that is what we would consider clean data. So it's ready to use for fine-tuning with very little change. Did that answer the question?
So you can give it a body of text and say, write a series of tweets about this, and it'll write them? Like, what are the guides which you need for that example?
Write a series. If you're fine-tuning, you would give it like a body of text, like 5,000 tweets you had written, and then when you talked with it, it would talk in tweets.
Oh, okay. What about an automation that would do tweets for you based on a larger article, let's say? Like, what if you could you do when to create social media posts? What kind of framework would you need to give it to do so?
So I actually use a very specific framework for this that we call Monkey with a Keyboard. And we designed it to avoid fine-tuning because fine-tuning takes just a little too much work for the average person to deploy right now.
Okay, so what is it?
So first, you have a prompt or an assistant that atomizes your long-form content. And when I say atomize, I mean it breaks that content down into question-answer pairs. The reason we do that is because good social content is generally based around answering a question, at least in business. Then we can take those question-answer pairs and we can smash them against templates that we know work for the specific channel. And at least in my experience, we get about a 20-25% hit rate. So about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of the piece of content that setup produces are going to be good enough to publish with minimal editing.
Okay, so you still have a human look at them and just see which ones are good or no good.
Yeah, I just have them generate them all into a spreadsheet. And there's 2 more steps I put on top of that to get it up to about 35%. The first is I add an extra step to infuse more of my style. So I have a little style guide that I had an AI generate out of all of my content. And then I have the tweet that's created. I have it rephrased in that style. And then I have what I call a tweet grader at the end. And we run the grader 100 times to see, the grader is set up as, oh, you are a marketing automation professional, this stage in your career, and da-da-da-da-da. So it's like a little audience member. And then we have those little AI audience members vote, like, 100 times, and we see if they pass it or not. Because at least for, like those general people, AI can predict pretty accurately.
So you can only get it up to 35% though with all of that. Like how come we can't go more?
I think 35% is pretty good. I'm only working with interns here. I've got the best interns I've ever had, but if we fine tune, we can get that up a bit farther. But once we get into fine tuning, we have to use much more complex systems. And we're generally going to fine tune multiple LLMs. So that way we have a fine tuned editor and we have a fine tuned writer. And we might, depending on the type of work, we may also do like an extra database subject matter information that they pull in from. The reason I kind of avoid using fine tuning for that is actually super simple. The AI is going to get better again. And when it gets better again, the new version that is like updated, GPT 4.5, GPT Next is what they're calling it. It's supposed to come out later this year. OpenAI is saying it is 1.5 to 2 times smarter than GPT-4. And so fine-tuned GPT-4o Mini is probably not going to be better than GPT Next when it comes to writing.
When's that supposed to come out? 4.5?
Later this year. So probably short. I think they've got a demo day of some sort coming up pretty soon. So I'm guessing a month or two after that.
Okay. So maybe October, November, let's say.
Yeah. Because they've said GPT-5 is not this year. That could change.
GPT-5 is what?
Is not this year.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. What's that supposed to have? But I guess 4.5 should be a big leap forward. So maybe just worry about that one.
Yeah. And I know, I think everyone's going to release one more like incremental step in models this year, but we're not going to see a real big jump again until next year.
What's the big jump going to look like, you think? Or who knows?
I'm happy to speculate.
Sure. That's a rare thing. Usually people never are.
Yeah, I mean, I think really this is like a who knows, but I think we know a few things. One, it is going to be much, much better at math. And AI just won a math competition. And that's like a very big deal. That's a breakthrough event. Two, it is likely to have much more complex reasoning because there's been a lot of like architecture improvements in how we deploy models. And three, if right now it's the best intern we've ever had, I think the next version is probably going to be the best entry-level hire. Like right now, it's maybe a high schooler, early bachelor's degree. I expect it to be bachelor's to master's on many like standard tasks.
What are some things that you wanted to do that it's not quite there that you think in the next year we'll be able to do for you?
I think at least for me, like it doesn't write quite well enough for me to publish without editing anything except like short tweets. AI doesn't do novel insights yet. But in terms of day-to-day work, I am more limited by the amount of time I have to actually implement these workflows than I am the technology. I'm sure you've heard everyone say it, but it's the worst it's ever going to be.
Well, that's good. Okay, well, let's move on then. So what does your consulting look like? What would be a good candidate business, and what do you do for them now that you've given these examples?
So our ideal partner business is between 1 and about 50 million a year. They understand the value of having like digital technology. They might even have some operations team in place, but this is not their specialty. They know it, and they want to bring in a team that can take it off their plate permanently. And so we come in and we embed team members that we call draftsmen to document all their SOPs, all their workflows, all their technology and tools and infrastructure. And we start building solutions to unlock their bottlenecks and to support their strategic goals.
Okay, right. Find ways to automate, improve productivity. What are some comfortable benchmarks you have? Like we can improve the efficiency of your workflows 10%. What are some things that you know that you can comfortably do with a company?
Yeah. So we know that a company working with us for about a year is going to generally automate 3 or 4 key workflows. And as a result of that, they are going to see anywhere from 20 to 80% improvement in that workflow or in the key metric measured in that. So a few specific examples. We've helped companies automate their collections and invoicing processes to improve their payment speed by 90%. and reduce overdue collections from tens of thousands to low single-digit thousands.
Oh, how did you do that? What did you do?
I mean, literally automated emails and text messages. And then we gave a dashboard to the collections team. And so every day they could see everyone who was coming up and everyone who was due or overdue. And they finally had time, rather than chasing everything down, to just sit, because we also integrated all of their data. They had everything in one place and they could just sit down and call customers.
Oh, so instead of them having to manually call them, it would just, if the account is like a day late or it denies, it would automatically email them or text them, hey, so-and-so is late, click this link here and you could pay.
Yep. And then if somebody didn't do that, somebody would be calling them the next day.
Okay. Well, so how can people get in touch with you then to avail themselves of your consulting services and evaluate whether they could, what you can do for them, and if they're able to work with you, where can they go?
Yeah, you can reach out to me at thirdbrainautomation.com.
Okay, that's the best way, thirdbrainautomation.com. Okay, very good, Michael. Last question. What is your prediction for, again, the next year? We kind of touched on it with what you think maybe is possible in terms of like a generic, instead of a high schooler assistant, you're getting a bachelor's or master's degree assistant. But is there a particular business process that you think is going to really dramatically be automated using AI over the next year or two, or a couple of business processes? Like, what would they be?
Yeah, I think most like white collar data analyst and paper shuffling jobs. I'm not going to explicitly call out accountants and lawyers, but I think they're definitely on the chopping block in the near future for every reason except for the regulatory one. I think that's the reason why they survive.
Well, I had learned like outbound AI voice is being legislated out already. Like, I'm in Texas and supposedly there's legislation against that. So I guess that'll handicap what's possible, but maybe in terms of like customer service type stuff, what do you think is going to happen with AI?
I think almost every tier 1 customer support organization is going to move. Like, global tier 1 is going to be 100% AI. AI does it better than humans in a lot of cases. Yeah, I don't see a future in which anything but the highest end organizations are using humans for most of that stuff.
Okay. Anything else to add, or is that it?
I would just say, like, most white collar entry level. That's I'd be a little concerned.
Michael, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate all that you've said, and it is a complex topic, I think, for a lot of people, but it's becoming more self-aware, and I think I've gotten some good ideas from doing this podcast, and I think listeners may have too for their own automations. But it sounds like you're really at the forefront of ideas on how to use AI in business. So again, thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.